everyone. It is episode 422 of This is WholeLife, your favorite podcast in your feed, no doubt, happening every week from Orlando, Florida, where we dig a little bit deeper into the topics we are discussing here at WholeLife Church. And this week, Randy, again, this is twice in this whole series where Randy has been outnumbered at least 2-1.
Wow, I could get used to this.
Right?
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea.
It's probably not a bad idea. It's probably a better idea than leaving Randy and Ken alone to do the podcast by themselves. We've seen that show, and, it usually generates a lot of feedback, but it's not always,
Well, you guys hold your own. Well, you do just fine.
we give it our best. So our special guest this week, if you have not already listened to the message that we're going to be discussing, if you would push pause, swipe up in today's show notes, and you will find a link to Speaking of Grace. And there you will find a message from Christina Anderson, our special guest, called Embracing Your Story. Take the time to listen to that first. It'll make everything else that we talk about today so much more meaningful. So, Christina, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
See, a natural right from the get-go. See, Bernie, I told you. And so, no. I'm going to quote you. You said, I'm typically more of a one-on-one conversation type of girl. So I'm thinking this should be a perfect fit, right?
Well, yeah, it's a 2-1. I think I can handle that.
Oh, wow. Wow. Not only is it a 1-1.
She knows she's got backup.
She's got backup today. That's awesome. So when you were asked to preach, you're a member here at WholeLife, and you were asked to preach. Now, I just got to get the skinny, right from the source, because I wonder, Amari saw his phone and he was like, whoa, they must be looking for my mom. Did you assume they were looking for Bernie, or did they assume they were looking for you?
Well, I assumed that Ken was at the bottom of the list.
Okay.
Maybe we had asked several people. They had said no, and so we were like, maybe because I am on the church board, maybe she kind of got to say yes to this.
She's kind of got to say, I didn't think of that, but yeah.
Yeah, it kind of comes with the territory.
Well, we love our church board as staff because we know our church board. I'm not sure everybody knows. There is, you can find you guys on the website,
right.
But I don't know how many people dig that far. So in case you didn't know, now you know one of your church board members has been here on the podcast. How about that?
And then I happen to have some inside information.
Uh-oh.
You were not the bottom of the list. You were not even in the middle of the list. You were at the top of the list. So we're glad you said yes.
Which one of our Voices of WholeLife members were at the bottom? Because someone's got to be at the bottom.
Oh, there. Randy.
Well, I
no,
figured
he's probably at the bottom.
As long as you were at the top, I figured I'd have to throw you under the bus and see if we could, get you to. No, of course not. Everyone we've had this year, and I say this every year, but I'm really truly honest because every year it just gets better and better. And I felt like everyone this year, the only thing you were missing from your message, and if you listen to the podcast, you'd know what I was about to say. You know what I'm about to say. What was she missing, Melanie?
I have no idea.
What was the one thing, though, that she was missing from her message?
Pyrotechnics?
Well, of course, that.
Wait, was it bubbles? Because I did mention that I wanted to have bubbles at the very start.
If you would have had bubbles, then that would have immediately shot you to the upper echelon of any message ever preached at WholeLife. That's not without consideration or going back to think about it. That's just fact. But everyone in this message series, we've come around.
I know what you're going to say.
We've come to one thing and come back to one story. And I felt like she not only didn't go there, her story was, I felt it was a little refreshing. Okay?
Yeah.
Because I just felt like she didn't go there at all, and we don't have to talk about it this week.
Oh, no.
But should we let her in on it?
We should probably let her in on it.
Somehow. Well, Amari, it was his entire message. It was on Job. And with Alicia going through It's Not Your Season, right? What happens when it's not your season? Job kind of easily comes into that. And with Nate, again, when you're, not finding your place spiritually, or you find your place spiritually and go, oh boy, maybe this isn't what I thought I was, or what I thought I was, or maybe what I should be, that came into the equation. But this week it was like, hey, I kind of know who I am. I thought I knew who I was. maybe it doesn't always seem that way, like during the middle of the process, like, who am I anyway? Is this who I thought I was going to be? And then, but it turned out so good, and you had like one of the coolest stories ever. So before we go any further, what was the name of the book? Because there were a couple of people that I think missed it, and then I didn't see them in the chat after that. So I want to make sure, because a lot of our online family listens to the podcast.
Okay.
So I will put this in the show notes, so when you need it, you can click on it. But what's the name of the book, and like, how did you find that book?
So the name of the book is The Rabbit Listened.
The Rabbit Listened, okay.
And I use bibliotherapy a lot. So that is books. To help kids process their emotions and to help them kind of find their coping skills. Because again, I'm a child life specialist, so my job is to help kids cope in the hospital and to help them process their emotions. I utilize that typically through play, but also books is a really good way to help kids figure out what's going on. So I'm always reading books, gathering books, finding new books, and this is just one of my favorite books. Typically, I'm using this in the aspect of grief.
Okay.
And for me, the rabbit represents Jesus. So even though I work in a Christian hospital, not every family I work with is a believer, but I do think that the rabbit is a really good picture of Jesus.
So many people in the chat, and we only ended up with one question, and we kind of talked about that earlier before we started recording, but it's one of those where there was a lot of people chatting and just being like, oh, I needed this message. Great message. Thank you, Christina, for sharing your journey. Versus, other types of messages that would maybe lend to questions. Because I think most people, and when when you're watching online, you'll see the heads and I know it's hard from the stage because the lighting is kind of like, I know there's people out there, but outside the front 2 rows, I'm not really sure who's here. But you could see from some of the shots they took that the heads were like, they're bouncing up and down like, oh, yes, I totally get that feeling. Or you can just feel that someone is going back in time with you in their journey going, I remember that. I remember going through that same exact thing. And you said it was a way of figuring out or envisioning all of those big life moments, kind of starting from the beginning, your job, what your marriage might look like, your wedding, children, future home, all of the big grown-up things. I love that. I think we can all resonate again and think about that time when we had expectations, or maybe you had dreams when you were a kid about, see a lot of people that are like, oh, I imagined myself doing this, or I had a dream that I did this. And after going through all of that now, what did you learn specifically? If there's something you could like give away as a little nugget of maybe something you learned about, this is where I started, kind of like probably most people. But now that I've got, you've got the marriage, you've got under the belt, and that was what, 30?
30 years almost.
Wow. So almost 30 years. You got kids, you've got your career, you've got the home, like all these big grown-up things. And I say big grown-up things because when I started to think about this, I'm like, why don't they feel like big grown-up things anymore? Why do they still feel like I'm the same 18-year-old kid in your story, still trying to figure some of this stuff out? What have you learned along the way that's brought you to a place where you can say, I do embrace my story, and I'm proud of it. I'm happy that I went through it, and who the person that, like you said, the person that you see today is here because of this story?
That's a great question. I think I stopped getting hung up on the things that I thought defined me, right? So I'm also like a big believer that the person you are growing up really defines the outlook or what you think defines you. So, for example, I'm the oldest child. I am a high achiever. Like, I'm the girl who always wanted to have like the straight A's, and I found my attention in my family by being the goody two shoes, like that, if that's a term,
Wow,
like
you're my Ellie.
Right? Like, I was the one who always I was the good girl who got the good grades, the first girl in the family to go to college. And so all of what or who I thought I should be was tied to those achievements. And when I came to this place in my life where I wasn't able to define myself by those roles, because life doesn't always work that way, right? it really did shake my foundation. And then I had to figure out how now am I going to redefine myself, right? Like, I love being a mom. I'm really good at it, but it wasn't checking the box of like, I'm not getting a grade on that.
And I'm sure someone's looking down on my performance.
Definitely not getting a paycheck for it.
Oh, right.
I didn't get a degree for it. And so I couldn't figure out how all of that was aligning. And so when I started really stopping and started thinking about it and letting all of those really important things that should align with my character and the God-given gifts that I had, when I started seeing that those are really what's important. And I'll be honest with you, it all came down to children's ministry.
Really?
And that's going to sound so odd, but when I was at that church and I started to lean into those gifts, and every gift of mine aligns with children's ministry. Everything that I do that is my God-given gift aligns with that. But I didn't want that.
All those things you just talked about, like, none of them are bad.
Right.
To start with in life and go, I want this, I want this, I want this, because we have personal wants, we have desires, we've got what we think are our superpowers, especially when we're younger. And none of those things are bad. But then if we're using those as these irreplaceable, immovable objects of benchmarks that we don't have any other parameters to go from, how do we find our way to the next piece that says, oh, you know what? Those are great, but they're not like, how do we know that they're not defining us? That's the part I think is difficult, because I want, and I feel good when one of those comes. Like, one of the things I think I'm good at when someone says, hey, you know, that was a really good podcast episode last week. Oh, that makes Randy feel really good because something went well and, right, God worked it all out and it was great. But then if you think, well, if someone else will say, you know what, I really love the podcast. This is the best one. I can never drop this story because it just makes me laugh. Can we get someone else other than you to host? I like what you say, but I don't like the sound of your voice. It's like nails on the chalkboard. And I'm like, well, Jeff and Andy, you know, this was way back when it was 15 with Andy, Randy, and Jeff. And I'm like, but I'm the host. I prepare. I do this. They're just here to answer questions, and we have this conversation, right? So you have these equal things, and that's what makes you realize, like, some people think you're really good at it. Other people are not going to recognize that. So it can't be the immovable.
Right. So I think for me, and I can only speak to myself,
sure,
right,
of course,
is that I'm going to give you an example. I'm a great student. I can work hard at it, right? And I just finished my master's program, and I grinded at it because I had to have A's. That's just my personality. And nothing was going to get in my way. But I wasn't necessarily always happy getting those A's. But I wasn't going to be happy if I didn't have an A.
So it's a balance of what's the lesser?
Right. Like I can do it, I'll grind at it, and I'm going to get it done.
Yeah.
But when I'm on the floor doing clinical work with families and I'm at my best and things can be hard. I mean, emotionally, it is the most taxing work. I shine because I'm in rhythm with what I know in my core being is what I'm called to do. So this over here I can do. The A's I can do, like the studying and the writing and the research. I'm good at it. And I know that God gave me the gift to be good at it. And I don't think it's wrong.
Sure.
But it doesn't necessarily bring me my core happiness. Mm-hmm. But over here, this stuff that's emotionally taxing, I know in my being that is what God created for me to do. And I could do it 24/7, and I shine at it, and in my heart and in my head, in my whole being, I am so happy. And I'm also bringing a certain type of joy to my family because I can come home and be like, yeah, I'm wasted.
Yeah, I'm done.
But
yeah.
They can see that there's this joy and this light in me because I've been able to kind of figure out what it is that I'm called to do. And I think that's the difference. Like I could be that executive on Wall Street if I wanted to be. I'd probably be decent at it. I'd probably actually be pretty good at it. But I don't know that it would give me that core joy that leaning into that actual gift. And I fought it because I didn't think it was respectable. Like, I was like, working with kids, it just doesn't seem as like cool.
It's not as important somehow, even though it's so important.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. But here's something that I'm curious about, because your degree is in thanatology.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, which is not something you hear very often. So I'm really curious. Well, first of all, maybe you can talk about what that means. And then second of all,
Thank you.
what drew you to that? What told you this is the direction you need to go?
Yeah. So my master's is in thanatology, which is the study of death. And what drew me to it is that I experienced, as I shared in the sermon, my brother died in 2004. And that obviously shifted my life and my family's life. And I became a child life specialist after that. And so I have a degree in human development and family studies. But working with families, I am very drawn to helping them have a better experience with bereavement. I can't make it better, but I can make it a little bit easier. I'm super, I want to be more empathetic and compassionate and do what I can. So that's why I'm drawn to it. So I have started an organization to help kids in schools who can't access grief support, to do grief support in schools. My heart is drawn towards brokenness and vulnerable people. And so that's why I have a degree in that.
Well, I knew you were an overachiever. I mean, I've known you for a long time.
You've known me for a long time.
So I kind of knew that.
Yeah.
But then you confirmed it. You said encyclopedias. And I'm like, when people think about studying, I have one that's just getting ready to head off for their freshman year of college.
Oh my gosh, so exciting.
Yeah,
hard.
Yeah, kind of both, but also like you have no idea what it was like going to the library and pulling out the endless drawer full of
flipping through those
what are they
cards?
called? What did they call the cards?
Those what are they called?
I don't know.
I don't remember anymore.
Card catalog.
The card, yeah.
Yes.
And so you'd have to find, and it's like, that's in aisle E3, row 94 on shelf 167. And then after 4 hours, you'd be like, oh, it's not there. And you'd have to go to the front desk and like, oh, someone just returned it. Here you go. And you're like, no. So I'm like, encyclopedias, I was like, touche for those of us.
I will say, in an Adventist academy, it was much easier because...
Well, that's true. The library was small.
80 students looking for an encyclopedia is pretty easy, honestly.
Until you all need the same encyclopedia. And
that
then it's
is
like,
true.
well, then here we go. The idea, though, that I think maybe people are wondering, I'm wondering, and I know you to be this person, so it's not a question of do I believe it or not. I think the conviction that you speak with will also clue you in that you are a very confident person. And then realizing all of these little steps, which only are little after you figured out that this is the way I am, this is who I am. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm also comfortable with who I am, and also I really like who I am. So like there's some things that have to happen in your life before you become this confident. Where did you find was it just your personality? Where did you find the confidence to say, because I think that's when people are saying, when you're saying embrace your story, it's hard to embrace your story if you're like, well, I feel like this is what I'm good at. No one really says other than me that maybe I don't feel other people like building me up. I don't hear God saying, hey, this is what you should be doing with your life. And I'm just kind of floundering. So where does the confidence, how can you maybe find the confidence if you don't have it?
Well, one, I didn't find it on my own, right? There was that group of people who, when I was at my lowest, they were there. And I was low. Like, we're talking, couldn't look at a magazine because I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way my voice sounded. I didn't like the way clothes looked on my body.
Do you want to co-host a podcast with me? You don't like the way your voice sounded?
No,
okay,
at all.
never mind. No.
There was nothing about me that I liked. So it wasn't me finding it in myself. It was them helping me to find it. And when I say, it sounds silly to say like, oh, it was children's ministry. Honestly, that's where it started. It was me saying, there's something missing here. I wonder if I could maybe, start the Sabbath school. And they're being like 100%. Let's see where we can start. And me being like, well, I have this idea. And me being very shy. Again, I know
I can't imagine that.
Maybe people up on this, from me being up on the stage, couldn't imagine this, but I am like super shy, quiet, reserved. Let me just be a wallflower. And I was a big wallflower back then. Them saying, Christina, we think you can do it. Like, let's join with you. Them partnering, them peer mentoring, them saying, that's a great idea. No one's ever said it like that before. And me saying, oh, really? Like, I didn't think it was that great of an idea. Okay. So it really truly was. When I say they loved me back to life, that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And I think for people who are like wondering, who am I? Part of it is the people around you. Finding a group of people, whether it's a one-on-one mentor or it's a small group or it's, a group of women, a group of men, finding the people around you that can pour into you. Because it's not easy. Like, this was a long journey for me.
Yeah.
And I will be honest and say that there are still times when I'm like, I'm not sure. And Bernie will say, what are you doing? You got this. And I'll say, okay, you're right. I do. Or like, I'll say, I don't make enough money and and I'm not really contributing. And he's like, stop.
Yeah.
You know who you are and you know what you're doing. And I have to back myself up and say, yeah, I'm just going down that rabbit hole.
But that's so important to have somebody, whether it be your husband, whether it be, like you said, a group of women or men or one-on-one, a special friend or whoever, because it's really easy. And that's the other part is your confidence level is like through the roof. And I remember when you guys first arrived in Florida, because this was the same church, right, that you came from, if I remember correctly. And although I've never heard this story specifically, when you were talking about it, and I remember the girls were just tiny. Ours were really tiny babies. And when I was so excited because I'd met Bernie before, and so I was like, well, Bernie's family's got to be just as cool as Bernie.
Almost.
Well, it's hard to be Bernie.
It's hard to be Bernie.
I mean, I know quite a few Bernies out there, and I haven't met an uncool Bernie yet.
But there's not one like him.
There's not one like him. You're not wrong there. And so you might get the idea that someone would say, well, Christina, I mean, you're confident, you got like you found your place in life and with your work and career. And I think men get too much credit for the idea that we find our place or it's that much more important. And I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think women have the same desire to be that contributor to society, whatever that is, even if it's I say even, that didn't sound right. If it's being a mom, just being a mom, that's like the biggest one of all. And so to know, it adds a layer to your story to hear that the person before this confident person who has found out so many cool ideas about what God had for you, probably since
before I was born.
He knew us in the womb, right? And so having that idea that before it was this way, and still we can slip back into, well, maybe my, we all have those areas where like, maybe I'm not that good. Maybe this isn't.
We do. Even Bernie, now I'm just going to put him on blast.
Oh, there you go, Bernie.
Because I did say he's super cool, so I got to keep it even.
And you said he wasn't going to listen, so it'll probably be fine.
Won't know.
He won't know.
No one will tell him.
Don't
just
tell him, anyone.
Shh, everybody.
Happens on the podcast.
I'm his biggest cheerleader, right? So when he's doing something, he's like, yeah, I don't really know. No. I'm like, no, you can do it, right? Like, you have the skills. You have this. You have that. Because I think, and I don't think that there would be people who will look at Bernie and say like, oh, he's not confident. He doesn't know. He doesn't have his stuff together. Like, he's got this. But even, he has moments where he's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm the one. And I'm always like, what are you talking about? You're the one. You are Bernie Anderson. You can do this. You have this and this and this, and there's no one else that's more qualified to do it than you. And so I think that also I think the people around you help to boost your confidence and to remind you of your potential, your God-given potential, because I'm just going to be very honest. It's this. I'm sorry. I'm holding up the phone. Y'all can't see that. I don't like to always put social media on blast, but it can be very defeating to continuously see what's happening, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or all of the various things that are out there, right? Because I think that they're not accurate reminders of what is happening in other people's lives that may not be reflected in our own lives. And I think that can be toxic because it makes you feel like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not measuring up. And I don't think it's true. So one of the other things I do, and I did it way back when I was super low, I stopped looking at magazines. I stopped watching certain shows. I had to remove things from my life that I felt were reminders to myself that I wasn't measuring up in whatever way it was, because it wasn't good for me. It wasn't helping me. It was a consistent reminder to me that I wasn't a measure up in my own mind, in my own heart. And I still limit what I intake because if not, everyone's like, what, the devil? Yes, I do. I think the devil utilizes whatever means he can to make us feel a certain way.
Yep.
And I think that it's one way that he does that.
So we all curate our stories to a certain degree. I'm going to tell some of my stories sitting in here with you, but if I meet somebody on an airplane, I'm going to tell certain stories with that person, or if I'm talking to my neighbor. So given that we all curate our stories, and there's a certain kind of curation that happens when you're online, how do we figure out which of our stories is authentic? Which are our stories inauthentic if we're curating them? Yeah, I guess I'll just leave it open like that. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great question because I'm not going to lie, my online stories are pretty curated. I share very limited, and they're normally happy photos of my family's on vacation, right? I don't normally share too much. Let's just say that. I don't know. I think that's a great question. I try to be authentic and vulnerable, but not online.
No, I think there's a certain level of everyone, although I say everyone, that's a really big paintbrush to start painting with from the beginning of a sentence. Let's not try that. But I feel like if you have spent any amount of time online, you understand to a certain degree that most of our lives, when you see those curated moments, it's because for most of us I'll just, call us average people, right? Like we're not among the uber wealthy who are they're every day they have all these interesting things. They're traveling to interesting places because the resources are there, all this kind of stuff. But for the average person, think of that as you will. The curated moments are the ones we feel like are worth sharing. Nobody wants to know what we had for dinner last night unless it's for some reason it's really special for us.
You just disappointed a whole bunch of people who posted pictures of their dinner.
There's a whole genre that just was like, boo, hiss.
I do like to see coffee shots.
I know, I do too. And see, so there are those, but it's like most of us are like, well, I can really only afford to go to coffee where they make good latte art once a month. So, that you're like, okay, I'm curating again. But for the most part, nobody wants to not necessarily share. I'm open, and my wife would probably tell you I'm an oversharer, just because it's my personality is my biggest fear in life, and this is no joke whatsoever, is when I met Heather and came back to Jesus for real. And I shouldn't even say come back to, if I found Jesus for real. Because as a kid, I had no clue. And the clue I had was completely wrong from the moment I can remember. My biggest fear is that someone looks at me and says, "You're a fake. You're a phony. And this whole Jesus thing is not what it is because you do this, this, and this." Yes, I do all those things. And I've always been very open about, again, more so than many people are comfortable with, and sometimes more than I'm comfortable with. And after it comes out, you're like, well, that was an outside voice. You're trying to reel that one back in. But at the same time, I am convinced personally for me that my inability to have a regular filter for certain things has been how God has used me in the most ridiculous ways. That we don't want to be the person that, is constantly like airing their dirty laundry on like on Facebook. It's like, you're having the marital or the relationship wars and you're like, oh, wow, dude, it's Messenger.
Yes.
Please go to a different platform. But also, if people don't know that other part of us and all they see is the other, there's a certain degree of curation that we're putting up about who we are, especially at church. And I know that's the most dangerous place. I get it. But also, people can think whatever they want to think. But a lot of times I've had people after I've probably, or I'll confirm it, overshared, and immediately was like, wow, I'm not seeing this. I'm not resonating with this. And I don't know why you told me this. Only to have someone come back later and say, I've been thinking about what you were saying. And I didn't get it in the moment because I didn't understand what you were saying in the way that you thought I understood it. But I realized because of what you said that this is a problem in my life. And I don't know if you realized you said it because you saw it in me. And sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, and more times than not, probably no, because it's God. I really believe it's God saying, look, you were a complete screw up for so long that the amount of stories that you have are endless. So I can use this in a lot of different ways. And I've just gotten to the point where I've been comfortable with, look, yeah, this is who I am. And I'm happy with who I am now. I love who I am. I think I like myself. So that's the confidence there. And for people that know you in a different way, like from a different time, it's also a really great opportunity to embrace your story and be like, yep, that's who I was. I'm still that same person. I just choose to do a few things differently. And then when it's, well, how can you or why do you? Then that's the gospel. So easy to just be like, well, it's pretty easy. And it's like, can't be that easy. And it's like, no, it really is. So, but why, but just to finish that thought of where we kind of went with Jesus, God knew us since the beginning. He knit us together. He knew us before that. Why is it so hard though, for us, even though we know what Jesus has done for us, we want to tell people, we want our lives to reflect all of those good things and none of the bad. Why does it seem so hard to let his narrative come through? Because of either we're concerned about, maybe that doesn't put me in the best light, or maybe I don't want someone else to think poorly of me or think poorly of my family. When there's so many things that we let, like you said, curate our decisions and what we allow. And yet I feel sometimes when I'm not really in tune with what God's wanting me to do, I feel like, wow, I missed so many opportunities. Why is it so hard when essentially that's why? Because if not, then why do all this? Like, why do all the things that we try so hard to just be good people on a regular basis to the best of our ability? And then it's like, you miss this opportunity, like, wow, that hurts.
So what do you mean by when you say let God's narrative come through? How do you know what's God's narrative and which narrative trumps which narrative? How much control over your narrative do you have? Is there one narrative that you're supposed to live into?
Sort of. I mean, I know my narrative isn't what God necessarily needs, because my narrative is often foolish. It's often selfish, more than often selfish. It's more often than not, it's ways that it makes me feel good about me, which I often realize that even though that's not my intention, it can come off as I think I'm really awesome and I'm awesomer than you. So, and that's anyway, that's just not any of my intention. But again, what you said, you think, what's the devil? Yeah, I think it's the devil. I think the devil looks and takes something that you feel in your intentions are so innocuous. You're trying to help, you're trying to share, or you're just sharing something very simple that you're not even thinking like, well, this is a God narrative, this is my narrative. So I don't think it's always going into it with that. But how often do I not share something that I know I probably should, that I feel like comes from God? Because I'll just, like if I meet Christina for the first time, I'll say, I really feel like this might be what I should say, or it comes and it's like, oh, that doesn't, maybe I'll say part of it, but not all of it. Maybe I'll say it in a different way that I like better. And I often feel, just personally, this is me, feeling like sometimes God puts those words and stories there in my mind, and then I take okay, fine, I'll share that, but then I don't share some of the things, and maybe that's God saying, dude, you're oversharing. Stop it. That's why I told you not to say that. I don't know, but that's just how I feel. Like I will take a narrative that's been given to me and I'll screw it up.
So what is?
I know.
I'm just going to be your problem person, Randy, because I'm going to ask you more questions. What if you have an experience where you do something selfish, and then later you think, oh man, that I don't want to do that. That was bad.
Yeah.
You feel bad, and then you don't do the thing. Can that just be part of the narrative that you're living? Can that be God's narrative too? Or is that always a deviation from your narrative?
I think it can be the narrative. I just, and maybe you're answering my question for me or making me realize, I think that's my hypersensitivity to me not wanting people to think that for any reason or anything they do, they have to understand that I'm the problem, not God. Like I'm choosing something that is the other narrative, or I'm choosing something that he wouldn't choose when they see the bad in me, or they see the things that I screw up, or I don't do correctly, or I hurt someone's feelings. Like that's not, and even though it may not have been my intention to do that, it certainly didn't come from God. And maybe that's my hypersensitivity as seeing Christians from my point of view before coming to Jesus going, I don't want anything to do with Christianity because I don't see anybody happy. I don't see anybody truly, truly honest with themselves. I don't see people challenging themselves to believe what, because God doesn't give us all the answers, like just in having faith. And yet there was just so much battle for me in that maybe, and again, that's probably just me being really hypersensitive, because people say, I cannot believe you're Christian. And then after that, I can't believe you're Adventist. Like, how could you still be, like, after going to the academy or after going through what we know you went through and different things, how in the world could you possibly still be? And so I just feel like that's like, in many ways, there's people that I know that like, that's my ministry, and I don't want to screw it up, because I just feel like we don't have time to take the long way around anymore. And I feel like if I'm not doing it right, I'm pushing people into the long, like, oh, take the beltway around the city instead of just going straight in. And that's like one of my biggest fears is
that's
that
a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, so that's kind of a heavy
I know,
load.
and I know it's not my responsibility, but I feel like those little shortcuts can be all the difference. If when you know someone's being genuine with you, you will have that conversation. You will give them the benefit of the doubt in that conversation, even if you don't agree. And so I think that's the part that is very delicate to me to get right.
Maybe people can do that with you though too. Give you the benefit of the doubt. Recognize it. I mean, one thing that Christina was talking about in your message was this idea of chapters, life chapters. So yeah, our lives may be one continuous story, but they also might be chapters.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, just to throw it out there, just because I just thought of something, but I just wonder if, like, flipping that script a little bit and just saying like, hey, I may have hurt your feelings, or I may have said something that it didn't resonate quite well with you, but I do serve a God who he does forgive and he does have grace. And so I am so sorry that I offended you, or I'm so sorry that I may have said something that it didn't resonate with you, but it wasn't my intention.
Yeah.
And because I do serve this Almighty who's graceful, I just want to apologize. Like, I just wonder sometimes, because it's a heavy load to be like, I represent, and I don't want to make you go around the long way. I think that oftentimes people are just a little bit, I get it. Like, I understand. Like, my family, besides my parents, they're not believers. And it's like, oh, like, you represent the person because no one else in your family is. But I feel like being vulnerable and being authentic and being randy is enough. And saying like, hey, this is my chapter I'm in right now, and I'm going to be in different chapters, and just saying like, hey, I'm human. Yeah.
The authenticity is, I think, is the key. And so, but that also gets you in trouble, because when you're authentic, you tend to say things that, it's like, well, you asked, and it's like, well, it wasn't asking. That was kind of rhetorical. And it's like, well, yeah, but, that wasn't clear enough.
Say what you mean what you say.
And if you say that, you will get punched in the face from some people. Just trust me on this one. No, I get it, but it's something that is really, and I don't stress about it a ton, but it's always in the back of my mind, just because I know what a turnoff it can be, and so it probably is more pervasive than I should let it be sometimes, for sure.
I wonder. I mean, your description of Bernie actually reminded me of my husband, because he's so supportive of you, and he invites you into this space of flourishing. And I wonder if, when it comes to stories, as we're working through our own stories and watching them interact with other people's stories, if we can have the kind of grace to let people work out their stories in a space of flourishing, rather than, I feel like there have been times in my life when I have been around people who think they know what story I should be living. And it isn't until you get around people who are gracious enough to give you space to explore your story that you actually begin to do that process of accepting your own story and then embracing and flourishing in that story.
Giving the space, that's in that space to flourish, where it's okay to be you. It's okay to take the detour. It's okay to do whatever you need to do. That's pretty cool. And I think we're good at that when we meet people, right? Because you don't know the story, so you're just finding it out. But it gets harder and harder. Like 30 years, that's a big deal to be married in this day and age, or any probably time. It's 30 years, because the more you know, the less there is overall to find. I mean, we're constantly changing grace, so there's always something new. But there's also that, like, and there you go in 3, 2, 1, comment. Yes, scored that one. That's another, because we're creatures of habit. The tendencies are there. But what do you see? The other part I wanted to ask you, and maybe as we kind of wrap this part up, in our story, how would you compare, not necessarily one-to-one, I don't know, how do I want to ask the question? Like the what you felt and what you saw at your church in Salt Lake City, how does that compare with what you see and you feel here at WholeLife? And what are there similarities? Obviously it's two different eras of church going, but I feel like there's some things that we do really well here, and there's always obviously room for growth. And as staff members, we know that and we're aware. But maybe what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a completely different stage of my life.
Sure.
Thank goodness. But I do think that some of the things that we do really well here is that we love well. And I people may not know this, but I was super nervous on Sabbath. Actually, I was super nervous for like a month. But the amount of love that I got from people who were just like, Melanie, walking me through the process, reaching out, the people who are running the AV, the band, who were just like, they weren't just like, it wasn't fake. Right. It was real. The words, the affirmation, the like, it's going to be okay. Let me just talk you through it. So people in our church, they genuinely want people to feel like this is their home. And I think that that's truly the difference, is that when you feel like this is your home and you have a place and you're wanted, it can give you the opportunity to flourish. When you feel like it's safe to ask questions and to explore your faith or who you are, or where is my place in this church? Where is my place in this community? Where is my place in my work, in my home life? You need to have the space to be able to do that. I think one of the things that my church in Salt Lake did is they surrounded me and they provided me not just space to be able to ask those questions, but I mean, I went back to school back then. I had 3 little kids and my husband was working as the pastor. So we had no family where we were. They were our family because our family wasn't close. They watched our girls. They cooked food for me when I was studying. They surrounded me with that love. And I don't know what that looks like for families here because I'm not in that stage of life.
Yeah.
I want to say like, hey, we do the same thing. I don't know. I'm sure we do, but I don't know what that looks like. They were so open to like, again, new, fresh ideas. I came in with like a little... Man, if I had an idea, they were like, let's try it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Of course, maybe I was like their guinea pig because they were like, hey, here's this new girl and, she's got some ideas and who doesn't love a fresh idea? But
Not everybody.
Yeah.
We've all been there where we don't like that fresh idea.
No, believe me, I've been in several churches who don't. But there was just warmth. There's warmth here too, and I feel it. And again, I've said this before. Bernie and I have never been able to choose a church.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's hard when you're the pastor.
This is the first church we've ever chosen as a couple to be a part of, and we feel like this is our church. And I think that for us, that says a lot because I was perfectly fine just roaming around on Sabbath on a paddleboard and worshiping God as a 2 little couple and doing our thing post-pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
Until we walked into here. And I said, oh, okay, maybe this could be our church home.
Maybe this could be our church home. Oh, I like that. Oh, man. Oh, wait. I was just going to say we're going to wrap up, but wait, there's more.
There's more.
Shuffle that last piece of paper, Randy. Here it is. From the chat, our good friend Tammy asked, pressure on our self-worth seems to have accelerated with social media. We see others posting in a life that makes us feel insecure. This is particularly impacting for young people. How can we help ourselves, and especially our young people, navigate this pressure when we know leaving social media is essentially impossible today? And I would add that young people leaving the church is slowing that down seems nearly impossible today. And so maybe what we just talked about is the answer, is young people with fresh ideas, good ideas.
Fresh ideas. I'm a big believer in mentoring. In my role, I also am the network educator for the Child Life Department, so I go all over the state for Advent Health, and I'm mentoring young people who are new, fresh child life specialists who are out there in one-person programs, and they're so unsure of themselves, right? They're new and they're by themselves, and they're in new relationships or they're out of relationships and they just don't know their way.
Yeah.
And I remember that feeling. And I think mentorship is so undervalued.
Yeah.
Right? Like whether it's adult women mentoring teen girls, adult men mentoring teen boys, families are in crisis. I say this because I work with them every day in the hospital.
Yeah.
What's happening in homes, we just have no idea the impact that it has on our kids. And I think that mentoring could be such a valuable thing that if a church could lead. I did youth ministry in Utah, and those kids, we're still in touch.
Yeah.
It's been 13 years now, and
Still,
right? Because when you form a relationship with a young person, you mentor them, you help them fall in love with Jesus, you show them compassion and kindness, you let them make mistakes, you let them ask questions that you don't want to answer.
Yeah, of course.
Or maybe you don't have the answer to.
Yeah, or that one. Yeah.
And you do it in a non-judgmental way. It forms a bond.
Yeah.
And they leave the church. Maybe they come back. Maybe they don't. But you're still there.
You have a shared story.
You have a shared story.
Mm-hmm.
And that story stays with them. And you may be the person that they call at 1 a.m. when they don't have anyone else, when they're afraid to call their parents. I feel like that's transformational.
No, there's no doubt. And I think all those things, I think we are doing those things here. I see those things happening here. And then from a more of a just overall church aspect, it's something that we've kind of taken the mantle on this year. We have a group coming from Canada coming to tour our church for a couple of days. How do you do all these things that we see from afar that maybe we don't either, we think we don't have the ability to, or we think we might, but we're not sure. And if we did, how do we do this? And seeing that kind of even that same thing where people say, I want to be a part of a church that feels like home, but we're not sure what to do to make it feel that way. We think we're doing it, but it doesn't feel like when, for instance, the digital media lab that we spoke at in, oh man, I even forgot where it was.
Fort Myers.
Fort Myers. I mean, we got held up at gunpoint during church. I mean, how in the world could I have possibly forgotten that weekend?
Oh, that's a story.
Wow, I want to hear that story.
Yeah. And so it was the Florida conference just saying, hey, there's churches that, don't know about certain things they want to have, like podcasting. And so they brought some experts in from different places. Justin Koo, who everyone loves, that does, the social media stuff, and some other podcasters, some visual artists, and all of this. And part of it was why do you do, like the disconnect between why do you do what you do? How do you know what to do? And the only thing I could keep coming back to, and it was what my presentation was on, was like, well, even just streaming, they're like, well, we're not sure we want to stream. Why would we stream? And I'm like, our online family is amazing. Mm-hmm. I have an amazing time. If I'm not in the chat on Sabbath morning, at least one service, I feel like I haven't gone to church. And they're like, why do you call them family? I'm like, well, the people that come in, like your church, you'd call them family, right? Like we're the family of God, we're the church, we're the body. And just because someone's watching via an internet connection, if COVID taught us nothing that we should be able to agree on, that wherever we can gather, let's not leave anyone out. But the thought process was like, oh, and then it's like, well, what guides you? And it's like, well, we have our mission, vision, and values. It was on every slide that I had, and as part of the design of it, and people kept coming up, and they looked at the shirt, WholeLife Church. And they're like, "Are you an Adventist church?" And I'm like, well, it kind of is an Adventist organization that asked us here. So I'm like, but I had so many people ask if we were an Adventist church, and I'm like, why? Because they're like, Adventist churches aren't warm. They're like, that's why we're here. And I was like, ouch, that hurts a little bit, right?
Doesn't it?
But to have that realization and then to say we want help. So I love the fact that in all of our ministries, whether it's singles, people that are retired, young people, youth, teens, the littles, that we are pouring into them in every stage. And as a church saying, look, this is who we are. We like who we are. We're embracing our story of being a church without walls and inviting everyone to worship and love Jesus to the best of their ability on their journey. And we just love you wherever you are. And that's hard for people to grasp if that's not your culture. So I feel that too. Thank you for saying that, because I feel like that's it does require us to do something. It requires us to have that change of heart and then to be also willing to share it. So I'm glad that you're not just the couple out on the paddleboards every weekend, that you're actually here with us, because I enjoy seeing your smiling faces when I come to church. It's always good to see you when you're here. I know you guys travel a ton, so we don't always get to have you, but it was extra special to have you this week preaching. So thank you. We know that it's a big deal, not only once, but it's twice.
Wait, it was just a conversation, a family conversation.
But it was a great family conversation. And then to come back on Tuesday and do it all over again. So thank you for coming. And know that your online family here at WholeLife enjoyed your message a great deal. They were in the chat just resonating and loving, and especially the book and the story. It was like, I mean, we're all kids a little bit, right?
We sure are in our hearts.
We all want to have story time. So next week, Christina was the final. She was the finality of our Voices of WholeLife. I'm going to take a minute, compose myself. I said I wasn't going to cry when we finished this year, but here we are at the end. So next week, and I'm not going to give you any teasers because I don't have any to give, because Melanie had to go, and I knew she had to go, and it's good for a good reason. And for some of you that might be here this week, you'll know why when you get here Saturday morning. Secondly, I do know that it is the family that plays together. We've been in the middle of, for those of you who may not attend regularly or you may have missed, we did not do VBS this year, and instead we decided to have like a 7-event summer party. We've already had a parenting seminar that was like 100 people strong. It was crazy attended. We have a parents' night out that's upcoming this week. We're having at the RDV Ice Den. It is skating, so from 11 to 1 we'll have a whole ton of time for just the WholeLife family to go out and skate and bump and bruise and carry each other around and all that good stuff. We've got improv night, hobbies, ice cream night. We've got all kinds of things that are still. We got Lake Day coming up. WholeLife.church/events brings all of those to you. You can just click add them to your calendar. You can even invite friends from the little share button that's there. All the information that you need, whether it's registration or just when the event is happening, and all the details, you'll find them there. And finally, that is going to do it for this week. So guys, as always, thank you for listening. Please remember to share with your friends and family, and we will see you all next week.